I'm your host, Jack, your failure connoisseur, and today my guest is Kendra Rainey. She's the coolest woman I know. She is the VP of Strategy and Content at Edgar Allan in Atlanta in the States. She's currently writing a book about branding and, in her own words, a dead simple strategy for people wondering if branding is bullshit. And she's a strategist and writer who's been shaping brands and creating content for companies big and small for the past decade and a half. She's been at Edgar Allan for over 10 years now. She was my boss when I worked at Edgar Allan. Best boss I ever had, Kendra. And I'm very, very excited to have her on the podcast today. The failures, though, that we will talk about in today's episode are failing to launch a career in public education and then failing to be a big shot NYC agency creative, being a crappy off-the-cuff performer for a long time, and spending a lot of time failing at appearing confident and assertive in her younger years. So, Kendra, welcome to the Webflower podcast.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's so good to talk to you.
It's great to have you back on my screen.
Yay!
It's really weird, but it's really nice. And it's just nice to have you on the podcast, chatting about all the ups and downs of your career. And I know a few of them because we've talked a little bit, obviously while I was working with you about your incredible, illustrious career. But I am very glad.
You're making me sound so awesome. I love it.
Yeah, well, you are awesome. People need to know you more. So I was like, yeah, I used to work with Kendra Rainey, and they're like, who? And I'm like, no, you need to know her. Because people know Mason, because obviously he's very big in the Webflow space on Twitter and stuff. But, you are a big part of the engine room of Edgar Allan. So I'm really, really glad you're on the podcast.
Yeah, same. Happy to talk about all the fails.
Talk about all the fails and the successes
put on my
along the
announcer
way.
Voice.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about all the fails. So let's start with a difficult question. Why not? Because this is a difficult podcast. Come on. What is your relationship with failure?
Oh, so when you asked me to do this, the first thing I thought was not that I can't think of anything that I had failed at, but that I was having a hard time thinking about failure in retrospect, I guess. So either I have an enormously large ego, or I'm delusional, or I just have some kind of amazing way to learn from failure. I first thought, God, what could I talk about? But then I was like, you know what? I just tend to, especially as I've kind of gotten on in my career, tend to look at a lot of the things that at the moment seemed like a really bad deal, seemed like a really crappy situation. And I tend to look at them now as doors opening. So whereas I might have at the moment of, being laid off from a company that I really liked, which happened, or being fired from a band that I was playing in, that also has happened. At that moment, those were bad things. But looking back, I realized that, if I hadn't been fired from that band, I might not have hooked up with these other people that really appreciate my contribution more and had a much better time and gotten a lot farther. If I hadn't been let go from that job that I really liked, I would have never, honestly, in that case specifically, I would have never been available to take Mason up on his offer to come on over to the goat farm and start working on Edgar Allan. So I probably would have said no. So I wouldn't be here doing this with you.
Yeah, we would have never met. But it is kind of crazy to think in your kind of darkest times in failure, when you're in the moment, you're like, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. But sometimes it's actually the best thing that could have happened to you, but you just don't see it until after.
And I hate that saccharine advice in general. I hate when God closes the door, he opens the window. It's bullshit. It's total bullshit. But because you can't see it that way. And it honestly isn't a straight line ever, ever, ever. So it's just about seizing opportunity and understanding, that not everything's going to be the way you want it to be, and looking for the good in what's happening next. And so getting competent in doing that, I think, is a big part of being happy as a human.
I'd say also big part in being happy as a creative as well, because, it's a weird world when you pour your heart and soul into making something visual for somebody else as a client, and then they give you feedback and they might not have understood the whole story, or you might not have explained it as well as you could have, or you could have presented it with this mock up, or you didn't put enough effort into this part of the presentation or whatever, and then you just feel like, oh God, why did I even bother? And I think you learn to become thick-skinned, through that course of getting rejected and rejected and rejected. And then you learn how best to, show that off to other people and talk about your work.
Yes, I think so. I stole from my favorite Peloton instructor, but she says this all the time.
I was so not expecting you to say that.
Yeah, so I have a favorite Peloton instructor. I am Callie's Killer Crew. Anyway, so she always says, we take the work seriously, but not ourselves. And that is, I keep that in my head all the time. Like, do your very best, do your best job, be a team player, shoot your shot, but don't take yourself so seriously that when somebody doesn't like it, doesn't appreciate it, wants to give you edits or feedback that you don't want to hear, that you're going to take it personally. And so I am 1,000% sure that is not the way that I started my career, but especially if you are in the creative field, you're going to get so much feedback and so much, confrontation about what the right decision is, because it's so subjective. And if you internalize it, you're going to be real unhappy. So you have to kind of say, hey, I take the work seriously. This is what I do, but I do not take myself seriously. You can tell me whatever you want and I will think about it and take it in. And if it is the right way for me to respond, I will respond in kind. So
yeah, that's great. And I think also as someone that was, working under you, like I definitely saw that, like there's just so many problems that happen in an agency that you need to just be like, okay, well, that's happened. Let's move on and just react as positively you can with the information that you have at the time, but not be like, oh God, like I've poured my heart and soul into this and now they don't love me or whatever. And you just kind of go, okay, what's the next thing that we can do positively?
Not productive to dwell or wallow or ruminate, really. Not in this job.
Yeah, and you just bound on. No, but I think that's really, really important. And speaking of this job, you are obviously working at Edgar Allan. You've been there for 10 years. For anyone that doesn't know the goat farm and may not get the reference that you said earlier, so can you tell us a little bit about how Edgar Allan came to be?
Yeah, so Edgar Allan, we are global and we don't have an office anymore. We're decentralized. But before the pandemic, we were Atlanta, Georgia based. And Mason Poe founded Edgar Allan after he was laid off from his job and decided that he wanted to kind of go on his own, grab some people and take them along with him. I also had been laid off from my job and had just had a baby as well. And so when he contacted me, there's a whole story about how we met. We'd known each other for a really long time, but when he contacted me, I was in a position to say, yeah, let's start this thing. He said, I want to start an agency built around story. And you're a storyteller and I've got the technical back end and we've got some other people that we can, build websites and do a bunch of cool things with digital products and tools and basically make the web a better place. Are you with me? And I said, yeah. And we started at our office was in a place called The Goat Farm. It's still there. It was a little different pre-pandemic than it is now. It was a munitions factory turned hippie commune turned artist space. There was a donation-only coffee shop called the War Horse. There was a dance troupe next door to us. Oh, so we heard the same like booming clip of music over and over and over and over again. The walls were very thin. It looked like the apocalypse when we moved in. Mason built out our entire space. And it was a wonderful place full of community. And we tended to sort of acquire people that were wandering around doing other things at the Goat Farm. We acquired Jamie Weinstein, who was writing for a magazine that shuttered its doors. We acquired Zane Coffin, who just happened to be working next door. And Mason, I think, basically told him he was a UX guy. And he said, okay. And now he's a really, really great UX guy. So that's how this sort of came about. And so when I talk about the Goat Farm, I talk about it with a lot of nostalgia. And it was the very beginning of Edgar Allan. And then when the pandemic hit, they were about to redevelop the entire property. They've done about half of it now. It's got a boutique hotel and fancy new studios and an art museum. And they're using our old office as their corporate offices now. But we decided that we would be better off if we let go of our physical real estate. It was a really good decision because we now can hire the best people from all over the world. It doesn't matter if they can drive to an office in Atlanta. And it's also, I think, launched us to be able to take clients that are further away and bigger and don't require us to be like, driving to a conference room to see them. So yeah, that's the Goat Farm. That's how that happened.
It's a great tale. And I feel like it's kind of the DNA of Edgar Allan. And even working as a remote worker for Edgar Allan, I found that there was definitely a kind of a goat farm, like family vibe to it, even though it's remote. But can you tell us a little bit, like there's a lot of people that listen to the podcast that might not have a physical place. They might actually have remote workers. And actually, I had a call earlier today with someone who was saying that they really struggled to create a team culture within the agency. They struggled to have people that consistently work for them that really cared about their job in a way that you might if you were in, a physical office and you were on desks next to each other and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about how Edgar Allan creates such a team culture despite having that remote team?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of luck and hiring well. That's one thing. But I think that we have a particular way of hiring that tends to get people who are interested in being part of a collaborative kind of group like we are. So that's one thing. But it's in the management style, I believe, too. Chesley Lowe, our design director, me, Jared Mallon, Lemmy, all the people that lead the kind of higher level leadership positions. I think we are all very invested in everybody on our teams. Our mantra is basically, well, there's two things. We serve our mission is to be explorers at sea and then helpers in port, essentially. So when we're out there doing stuff in the world, we're, shooting our shot and doing our, doing big creative things and making things happen for our clients and helping other companies grow. But inside, we're helping each other and we're trying to help our industry and creating products even that are made to help people like us, like Slater and Wes, which are two products that are very useful to other Webflow agencies. I think we also make an intentional point of getting together in our different pods around the world. There's a large number of people, not large, I guess maybe like 8 or 10 people still in Atlanta. We try to get together fairly regularly physically and hang out off the cuff kind of casually as well. So it's not, you just feel like it's required. There's a large group in Argentina. They get together pretty regularly. We have a group in Serbia as well. And there are a few outliers around the country and around the world. So that's intentional. We also do online semi-monthly. It's kind of too much to do it every month, but semi-monthly things that get everybody kind of showing a little bit of their lives outside of work. So right now we're doing what we call May Moments. It's the second time we've done this one where it's that 1 second a day app and everybody kind of uploads a second of their clip a day. And it is so fun at the end of the month to go back and have people say, hey, look, that was me walking my dog. Look at this is Belgrade in the fall. It's beautiful, things like that. So our cultural committee, which is made up of a few volunteers, they come up with all kinds of stuff for us to do. And I hate to say that because it sounds so forced and hokey, but it never comes off that way. They do a very good job of choosing things that people, want to interact in. It's not mandatory. And I think just the general kind of vibe of growth. I tell my folks on my teams, particularly, that you can write your own ticket here. You tell me where you want to go and like, what do you want to do with your time and your career and where do you want to grow to? And I will do absolutely everything I can to help you, to support you in getting there. So that is like part of my job at Edgar Allan and part of my job as a manager.
For any agency owners listening, I think this is such an important thing to say because you might have a remote team, but I think creating that work culture is vastly underrated a lot of the time. It's kind of just like messages on Slack, here are tickets, fulfill this thing. And I think the fact that there's the core team at Edgar Allan that, has stayed. I mean, you've been there 10 years. I don't know how many years Whit's been there, but probably around the same. Jared, there's like a team.
We got a lot
really
of long timers and not a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think that's an amazing aspect to Edgar Allan and like a tribute to it actually as one of the most successful agencies in the space. Do you think like if there was one reason why Edgar Allan has such a successful agency, there's 45 people, there's teams around the world in pods that are doing amazing work for clients like IHG and Holiday Inn and just like how did Edgar Allan get to this success stage that it's at?
I would call it being really good chess players. Never just sitting and doing the thing that's happening now, always thinking several moves ahead. Mason actually says all the time, what you want to do is do what's been asked and not what's been thought of yet. And so that can sound scary if you're just trying to make it, doing the thing that you're doing. But it is kind of uplifting and inspiring too, to think that, where are we going next? And I'm not saying like the people at the very lowest end of the production are being like pushed on to do that, but they are, we like to think everybody is looking for the next opportunity. They're looking for that one kind of, you're talking to a client and you hear them say something. You, as a human, have the ability to read into conversations and say, hey, this person might be having a problem that we can solve, or they might know someone, or they're just sort of talking off the cuff about another person who has a problem that we need to solve. And thinking about it is just like, it's work, it's making stuff, it's making the internet. But really what we're doing is we're solving problems for humans, and we're using technology to do it. And if you contextualize it that way, it feels like helping. It feels like bettering something. And I think that is what keeps us kind of, motivated. It also then looking this couple steps ahead and saying, okay, well, what's going on with AI in our world? That's one of obviously the biggest things. And we've been thinking about it for over a year now. So we're, like, what can we do with that? Or, I'm constantly reading other agencies' brand decks and voice and tone guides and things like that. And like trying to understand, like, what are people thinking about strategy? I'm reading books. I'm trying to figure out, like, how can I better my craft, and also like help it link up better with the other things that we do in the agency, like, building websites and building products. So doing that is also important. So I think it's just, we hustle, but not to the point where we're hurting ourselves. We have a good communication between everybody on staff, and we're thinking a couple of steps ahead at every turn.
Great answer. Okay, I'm going to need to read back this transcript after this episode, because there's so many points in here that I think are really worth hearing. But yes, as someone that's worked for Edgar Allan, I definitely feel that, like, Mason in particular, he's kind of thinking, where are we at now, but where are we going? And
Mason is very, very good. I want to give him a lot of credit for that. He's very, very good at that kind of thinking. And the rest of his leadership is very, very good at making it happen. That's, I think, the balance there.
Yeah, second that. I think, Mason's definitely the... I was always amazed when he like messaged me on Slack while he was on a run, being like, "Hey, I've had an idea," and he was like,
he gets a lot of good ones on runs.
Yeah, he does. He'll send me a voice note and be like, "Hey, I've had this idea for Slater," and you're like, why are you even thinking about this on your run?
He's always thinking.
Yeah, no, he's very, very forward thinking. And then obviously there's a whole team of incredible people that are good at what they do, that are executing stuff as well. So I think that kind of left and right brain is a huge reason why Edgar Allan is what it is. Among all the amazing other reasons that you've said, you touched on something that was great, that you are constantly reading.
Yeah.
And you are writing your book, which I feel like we definitely need to touch on before we go into the failures.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book and why you think that people don't really understand branding as well as they should, maybe?
Yeah. So I think I told you before this, the other title of this is, oh my God, not another fucking brand book, because there are so many of them out there. But I don't know if I think I have any kind of special kind of perspective on it necessarily, except that the part about branding that I love is taking a really complex thing and trying to marry that with something else that is complex, which is human emotion and desire and want, and coming out with something at the end that is clean and simple and easy to love and, for a product, right? So you can overthink branding a lot. And this book is my attempt at saying, you don't have to. You are a human with emotions and a brain, and you understand, unless you are not a person who can, understand other people's intent and emotions. And even if you are, actually, you can do this. This is not rocket science. So the book kind of breaks things down into, well, I start out by talking about my very first interview for a brand position, and it was horrible. And that's actually a fail. I didn't think about that one. It's the very beginning of the book. And I'm a young, just about to graduate from art school, and had been working on my book. And like, I was like, the school that I went to did not have branding as a curriculum or as a degree or anything. I think they still don't. But they had advertising. You could go into copywriting, you could work with an art director, and you could get into it that way. And I found from doing the classes that I really liked that higher level thinking a whole lot more. And so I kind of carved out my own path in school, and I built a book. I started working with designers and instead of art directors, and creating, kind of bigger things and more brand level things. And so I went out to an interview, and this guy sits me down in his very fancy office and I show him my book and I talk about it. I'm a budding brand strategist and would really love to have the opportunity to create, stories and vision and all kinds of things for your products. And he just said, so you just graduated and you heard about this cool thing called brand. And then he basically gave me this reason why I had to he gave me this whole speech about how I had to work my way up to that I was never going to enter a position at that level. Holy crap, you have to start out at the bottom and you got to write a million words and blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, whatever. I thanked him for his time. I think I said in the book that it was all I could do not to key his Mercedes in the parking deck as I left. I was like, this sucks. But I didn't stop pitching for that job. And I obviously did a lot of copywriting and stuff alongside that, but I finally found a position that was amenable to me being in the brand mix pretty early. And so I ended up working there for a good while. But the book is just about breaking things down into the idea of, there's kind of three things that brand hangs on. It's position, vibe, and story. And if you can get those things right, then you've got a really good shot of hitting on that kind of good strategic gold. So that's the structure of the book. And then there's a glossary of mostly bullshit terms that everybody in the brand industry uses to say the same 5 things. And I wanted to kind of deconstruct that as well. But that's what the book is about when it is written. And again, this is something that I am working on and have been working on since last year and hope to get back to doing a little bit more full-time pretty soon.
Very exciting to read that when it comes out. I remember you talking about those 3 core tenets of branding before. And actually, if you go on the Edgar Allan, if anyone's listening to this is interested in learning a bit more, go on Edgar Allan's YouTube channel where there are some really interesting talks about branding, brand strategy, how that ties into visual identity. And it's really the piece before the website. So if you're a Webflower that's like, yeah, cool, I just develop, just give me the designs and I'll go from there. Yeah, maybe, it's worth knowing a little bit more than that to actually be a top Webflower, in my opinion. But that's another podcast for another day. We're going to dive into the failures now. Kendra, are you ready?
I am ready.
You are ready. That was a very confident I am ready. Tell me about failure number 1. Failing to launch a career in public education and then failing to be a big shot NYC agency creative.
Yeah. So the first one, I'm from a family of teachers. I've got an aunt and uncle who's a high school football coach, and more notably, both of my parents were public school teachers in Indiana and Ohio. And it was a profession that I knew when I was growing up. I knew the challenges of, but I also knew the rewards of it. Teachers are underpaid, but it is an act of service, essentially, to be that person in the world for so many kids. And it was sort of a family tradition. So what I really wanted to be when I was a kid was a writer, but I had no clue in rural Indiana how I was going to make that happen. So I was like, well, I'll just go with what I know. And I went to school at a state university in Indiana, Ball State University, actually, and got a degree in teaching. But I also got about 6 minors because I was like, I want to do all this other stuff. So one of them was media and communications, which was the closest minor to anything regarding copywriting or advertising writing or creative writing that they had at the time. And I loved that. And so when I got out of school, I got my teaching license and did all the accreditation, did my student teaching and got all ready for it. And then was like, I just don't want to do this. I took the route of, I don't know. I knew it would pay better if I did something else, but I didn't know how I was going to get there eventually. And I also was just like, this is just not in my heart right now to do this. And so I guess the lesson there is, I don't know if it's different today. I hope it is. But when I was going into college, and probably just because in my family, my mother was the first person in her family to ever go to college. And it was just expected that you chose a solid career path and you got your education, you paid your money to the state school, and then you did that thing, regardless of what your heart was telling you. And so the fact that I changed my mind felt weird. I felt like I wasn't allowed to change my mind. And you are allowed to change your mind. I've changed my mind a number of times, career-wise, I've worked in publishing for a while at the very beginning. I also waited tables a lot and worked in more traditional agencies. I worked in brand strategy houses. I worked in design houses. And then I got sort of into the more brand and web kind of thing. And that's what's led me to my job at Edgar Allan mostly. But yeah, you can change your mind. You can look at where you are in your life and your career and say, in this season, this thing ain't for me, right? It doesn't mean it never will be, but not right now. And to be honest with you, I still love teaching. I love talking to people and telling them things. That's not what teaching is, but And I also ended up teaching at that art school that I graduated from in Atlanta for a long time. So that was really fun to go like full circle from I was going to teach middle school and high school English. Didn't end up doing that, going full circle to teaching copywriters and art directors and UX folks. And actually, one of Edgar Allan's employees, Whit Langstaff, was in my very first class at that school. So that was where I met him.
No way, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. So the biggest thing that I think a lot of people find when they start out in Webflow is they're like, okay, I want to try a bit of everything. I want to be a designer. I want to be a developer. I need to know a bit of copywriting. I need to know a bit of like motion and other things. But what's your advice to them? Because I think from hearing you, it sounds like you've tried out a lot of stuff before landing on your path. And it seems like you love the path. Like
I do.
You've had a bit of a squiggle, but then you've like found your thing. And it sounds like you're saying that's okay.
Totally okay. Totally okay. Try all the things. And I am just, I think, lucky in that I hit a thing that I can sustainably be excited about doing and be excited about doing it for decades. Like I never thought that I would be able to make that choice. And I don't know that that's a choice that everybody can make, but do the thing that makes you happy. And then if you need to move on, do the next thing. That's entirely okay. Doing all the things at once is where you get in trouble. And that's that, it's obviously the jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. But not being able to differentiate yourself based on an expertise is not a great path to be on, in my opinion. If you're doing things that are like, if you're literally doing kind of an okay job at everything, then you should probably focus. But play around. That's definitely good advice.
Yeah. And then like when you failed to be a big shot NYC creative, like how did you feel? How did you bounce back from that?
So this one, I don't see it as a failure at all anymore. But at the time when I was at Portfolio Center / Miami Ad School is where I went to postgrad. That's what the ambition was for every single person in my class. They were going to the New York field trips and they were applying to Ogilvy and applying to Crispin on the West Coast. And they wanted to be like right up there at the top. I want to make a Super Bowl commercial. And I was like, I didn't really want that. I felt bad for not feeling that ambitious. And honestly, I was like, you just got this world-class creative education, go and do it, is what my, like in the back of my head was. And I was like, I just don't really want to. Finances and relationships and just the fact that I liked the idea of staying in Atlanta where I was at that point. And it has been so rewarding to have come up in that creative industry and rather than have been very likely a little cog in a big wheel churned up and spit out by the New York one. Like I probably would have ended up back here anyway. People eventually do, right? Back in some other market, right? And, honestly now, and I've been yelling into the void about this for years, it hardly matters anymore what zip code you are doing the work from or what country code. And back then it was a big deal. And thankfully the pandemic has completely blown that shit up because it was always such a joke to think that the only creatives of merit lived on the coasts or in London or in the big, commercial centers, that it was some kind of badge of honor that you couldn't possibly be good until you had made it there. And that is such bullshit. So I am super happy about that decision ultimately. But at the time it felt like, man, I'm young. I got time. I'm good at this. I could make it, but I just don't want to. And so that was fail, but it was a success ultimately, staying here.
But I think okay, so a lot of the time people, I think, look at where they're at or, their lack of connections or,
right.
I never had any family that went to, this prestigious university or school or whatever. And they think, oh, that's, a huge disadvantage. But I think you can look at it the other way and be like, I live in a small town in, rural nowhere. I can be the number one person in my local area or, I have a unique advantage. And it sounds like what you did was you were like, you know what, I'm good, but I'm not going to be where everyone else that's good and super ambitious is going to be. That's not my path. And you had like the courage of your conviction to go on your own path in
Yeah.
Atlanta and be there long enough to
Yeah.
see the kind of fruits of success, as it were? Is
Yeah,
that
it's
fair?
kind of like big fish, little pond. I wish that I could say that I was that strategic back then. It was a lot of I would love to say that, yeah, that was on my mind. I was 25 years old and I knew that. No, I didn't know that. But other things kept me here. And I decided that if I was going to be here, I was going to know everybody. I was going to go. I think I've, up until the pandemic, before I came to Edgar, I bet I worked for every big agency here in town as a freelancer. And that was a lot of fun. So you get to know a lot of people. You get to add to that network. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say by any stretch of the imagination, Atlanta is a city of 7 million people that I am like the best brand strategist in Atlanta, but I'm doing great. So if I were in like, my tiny hometown, I'd definitely be the best brand strategist there. But I think I'd be the only one too. So
you'd be the best by virtue of being the only.
Exactly.
No, but I just think this like idea of unique advantages is quite a powerful idea for anyone that's listening. And like, you don't necessarily need to go to the physical, like, traditional places to actually see success. And I think that's something that's super exciting about the Webflow community is, you can live anywhere and do anything from anywhere and have the confidence to kind of strike out on your own if you want to. So I just think that's important to highlight. Tell me about failure number 2, being crappy at being an off-the-cuff performer for a long time.
So I do a lot of off-the-cuff honestly, I will do 4 performances today, which is a wild day for me. I had to appeal my property taxes to DeKalb County this morning. I'm on this podcast with you. At 3:30, I have to give a presentation to a client that I've only met once. And at 8:30, I'm playing in a rock band. So that is a lot of stuff that requires, improvisational skills and like being able to be on and have the spotlight turned on you. And when I was a younger person, it was weird because I was really drawn to doing it. And I always say that, like, give me a microphone. There's never been a stage or a microphone that I did not want to stand on or yell into. Honestly, that's true. But when I was younger, I was terrified to do it because I would just blank. I remember being at my very first like middle school band concert and standing up there, and I walked over to the sheet music was on the stand, and I couldn't read it. It just went like, and it freaked me out because I was just like standing there paralyzed for the entirety of the song. And ever since then, I realized, God, that's a problem for me. I want to do this, but I'm so terrified of it. So I figured out ways to prepare to make the paralyzing thing not happen and to make the voices that are constantly always yelling in everybody's ear, you suck, man. Don't say that, to make them shut up, basically. And part of that is honestly, and this is going to sound crazy, but I will subject myself to experiments where I'm like, I feel underprepared for this. Let's see how this goes. Just so I can experience whatever that embarrassment is going to be and then realize, or the awkwardness, and then tell my dumb brain nothing bad will actually happen. And so doing that enough times, you get to the point. Plus, if I'm talking about my job, I'm prepared enough on a daily basis to go do that without a whole lot of problems anymore. But before I would like run my stuff the night before and like know my stuff cold. And then someone told me once, know it and then forget it and then go do it. And that you will have a better kind of grasp of it. So I try to do that. Somebody said to me once, director of technology at a very large brand said, to a room full of people, she said, we're just making a website here, people. Nobody's going to die. And so I was like, this is not heart surgery. So I can also have that in my corner if I feel like I'm going to fuck this up. I'm going to say something stupid. I'm going to ask the wrong question. My ideas are no good. At the end of the day, it's probably going to be okay. I might get a little red-faced. I might get a little embarrassed. I might walk out of the room and I might want to crawl in a corner. But ultimately, I still get to go home at the end of the night and no one's murdered me. No one's died. So that's the bar.
It sounds like a healthy way to look at it. I mean, I definitely think that presenting to clients is like definitely one of the scariest parts of doing creative work, because you're in a flow and you're doing the creative stuff. You're like thinking about colors and messaging, and it's like all fun, and then it's like, oh my God, I need someone to actually like the thing that I've made. And the whole presenting that in such a way that makes them see your idea and stuff is quite a scary thought. But like you say, no one's going to die. But apart from no one's going to die, do you
Right.
have any kind of like tips or tricks that you've learned over the years of presenting creative work that you could share with anyone that's listening?
Let's see. Or if you ever get the opportunity to do it, this is a really tactical thing, on a Zoom call or on a video call, the presenter notes in Keynote and PowerPoint are amazing. I will, if I am in a hurry, sometimes just write everything I want to say. Like a lot, sometimes it's not just off the cuff. Sometimes I'm just reading from what's there. So I can kind of turn that voice off to say, yeah, you knew what you wanted to say. You knew what you wanted to say when you made this thing. And here it is. As a reminder. So that is a very tactical thing. It just helps us having notes, really good notes. If you can't have notes, what I tend to do is just practice a bunch, repetition. It's a thing in, I don't play guitar, but in music in general, just muscle memory, right? So, and you can do it with your brain too. You can, if you're playing chords in a guitar, you're playing, like I play trumpet. So your lips remember the positions to make the notes after a while, and it just becomes kind of rote. So if you do things enough, you'll start to feel the rhythm of what you're going to be presenting. And also just remembering to, if somebody asks a question or has an objection, I like to just like let it sit for a second, like take a beat, and don't be reactionary, because that, at least for me, when I'm reactionary is where I get in trouble. So my mouth moves a lot faster than my brain does, which is not a great feature. So sometimes, so trying to get that to slow down is, you get a lot, you have a little perspective, you have a minute. And plus people will also backpedal sometimes if you let them sit long enough in their own uncomfortable statements. So you get a little more information too. In terms of, just prepare and eventually just do it. Honestly, just do it and do it and do it. And even like, I can go back to like the playing in bands things. Like I've played trumpet for a really long time. And recently I've just started singing. So that was terrifying at first, because I was like, God, am I on the right note? We're not playing like world-class venues, so you can't really hear yourself. So you're like, oh, what am I doing? Is this, and then you go and you watch the video, even if it's you're just terrified of seeing whatever you've done. I did this when I was first, doing presentations. I would watch the recordings back and be like, okay, I can improve that. I can improve that. And you feel better about it. A, it's usually never as bad as you thought it was. And B, you get the opportunity to do better next time. And that makes me feel better. I always feel better if I'm doing something, if I'm moving forward, if I'm improving something. It keeps me from worrying about having made a mistake.
Yeah, and not be worried about like where you're at now. Just be like, okay,
It was a
positive
moment in
thinking.
time.
Like, what can I do to improve that next time as well? And I think anticipating the client's like objections as well. Like if you can look at your own work and be like, what are they going to say that I need to think of an answer to now? Like, why did I choose this color palette? Or, what is it about these animations that I think actually really work, particularly for this website or in this instance? Because I think if you have...
Imagining the conversation. So that's another thing that I think this is a psychology thing that I've heard somewhere. Just, if you're having a difficult conversation, play both sides of it out in your brain so you can imagine what you think will happen. And it's less stressful. Same thing with clients. Imagine that they're going to ask you about this thing. They're going to want to know, why you made this decision. Have a prepared answer, and you'll feel a lot better about it.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. In fact, I had this situation yesterday where I wish I had asked myself why a lot more when it came to presenting the work. That's a story for another day. Tell me about failure number 3. You spent a lot of time failing at appearing confident and assertive in your younger years.
Yeah, so this is a very human thing. I think it's also an age thing. I don't know. I have not done an average of all the guests on your podcast, but I'm probably at the upper edge of the age range. And so when I was first starting out in work, I didn't stand up. I didn't ask enough questions mostly. I didn't always take credit when it was mine. Believe me, if you don't, someone else will, for sure. Not pushing all the time for the better, but maybe scarier creative solution if you really think that that's right. It was just a confidence thing, I think, and feeling like I didn't have the right or the years or the experience to really weigh in on things. But over time and repetition and just, I don't know, just being in the room enough, you get to the point, hopefully you get to the point where you're, I don't know. you run out of fucks in some ways. You're just like, I have seen this before and it ain't going to go well. So I'm just going to tell you right now that this is not a good idea. So you get to that point sometimes. I also was in a couple of high profile meetings with a couple of female CEOs. One in particular told me after the meeting that somebody in the meeting had said something that they didn't like or something that was feedback, and I apologized. And she said, never apologize. Just tell them why you did it. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. And that is a female thing too, because I'm sure men do this too, but we are sort of taught not to take up space and not to be loud and not to be assertive. And so every time you get to that point, your first inclination is to say, oh, I'm sorry, and just kind of fade into the background. And that isn't in business, especially not in your best interest. So speaking up and, having that confidence is something that I worked on a lot. And just, going into every meeting going, I am going to say this, or I'm going to say something. When it comes to this part, I have an opinion and I'm going to speak up, and it's making myself do it. And after a while, it becomes natural. It's muscle memory.
Okay. There's so much to dig into, and we don't have too long on the podcast. So I'm going to speak very quickly.
Sure.
Why do women apologize in the way that they do and not take up the space that men do? Because, and I'm asking this from the perspective of someone that gets requested, can I come on the podcast? Can I come on the podcast? Not once has a woman asked to come on the podcast. Not once. Whereas men seem to think that they have an interesting story to tell every day, it seems. And tell me about, and I think this is correlated, and I don't get it as a man, and I want to know from your perspective why that is, because I want to get more female guests on the podcast, taking up the space that they deserve and telling me about their failures.
Ooh, it is cultural. It is in the way that boys are raised in opposition to the way that women or girls are raised. And it is changing, I think. I hope it is. Because my generation and the millennial generation and everybody after, I think we seem to be much more aware of it and raising kids a little bit differently. But traditionally, boys are pumped up for doing anything. They're congratulated. They're given trophies. And women get those things too, but it is rewarded in a man for being assertive and aggressive and going after what they want and thinking very highly of themselves. For women, that is punished a lot of times. You are too loud. You are not feminine enough. You smile. Fuck you. No, I don't want to smile. Don't ask for it. Wait till they bring it to you. Things like that. And it's just ingrained. And I think that particularly the parents that I had, the generation, not necessarily those particular people, they're just, the women were just taught to be nice and raise a family and not rock the boat and just, be there for everybody. And that we're sort of taught to be nurturers and givers and not to stand up and take what we want. We're not the hunters. Oh, but we are, right? Some of us really want that. But you find out pretty quickly, at least I did, that if you were that, because I've never not been this way, but I think that I was just like reticent to assert it at first because you do it enough times and people are just like, who are you? Also, as a woman, it's never really a good time to be in business. When you're young, you aren't taken seriously. By the time you get married and are of childbearing years, they figure you're just going to walk away and get married and have a kid and just quit. And then by the time you're my age, you're just an old lady. Nobody wants to listen to you. So it's kind of hard to ever know when the right way to be is. It's more of a negotiation. And and to anybody out there that's a woman that wants to be on Jack's podcast, ask him. He is the nicest. And also this is a lot of fun. So
I'm very glad. I'm glad you say that. I thought you were going to end it with, and this podcast is the worst. No,
oh God,
that's very sweet of you. I think it's important to talk about this in the Webflow space because I have been very aware of that, like seemingly a curator almost, like unintentionally, but I guess I'm curating what a Webflower looks like. And it's just a very interesting thing that I've noticed as a result of doing this podcast. And this idea of taking up space.
That doesn't even account for, and I'm a white lady standing here doing this. That doesn't account for people of color, for people with disabilities, for people that are, neurodivergent. There's all kinds of other things. Like I am just the tip of the iceberg of this kind of, narrative. So
yeah, no, it's really important to mention. I think what I notice is the people that ask me to come on the podcast are often the same person every time.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a fascinating thing that I've never, I mean, I'm white, I'm male, like I've definitely got a white male blind spot as someone that's insanely privileged, etc. So I don't want to pretend like I'm like, whoa, look at me.
No, I don't think you're coming off like
I'm
that.
like so conscious, but I just think it's really important to talk about on the podcast in relation to failure and not trying to take up the space or not trying to rock the boat or not trying to be like the phrases that like traditionally I guess might be said of a woman who's loud, or like these phrases to describe people who are actually just standing up for what they believe in and being confident in their knowledge and ability and their capability to actually express what they want to express. And it's like overstepping the mark or whatever. And it's just like, I just think that's important for any young female webflower to be like, you know what, I am good enough. I do own the right to be here. And I just think that's really important to say. Coming on from that, you spoke a little bit there about not asking enough questions in relation to, you know, the earlier part of your career. And I think asking questions is sometimes perceived as like, oh, I should know this, I can't ask this question to the client, when actually I think it's the opposite. But can you tell me why you should have asked more questions earlier on in your career, maybe?
Oh, man. So I should have asked more questions earlier on in my career because guessing sucks. It's harder. It's harder to try to make up the ground that you could have just found out the answer and then moved on from there. You're not going to get as far with the creative idea, with the understanding of the industry that you're working in. Let's say it's, I don't mean the creative industry, but like, you're working for a healthcare company or you're working for finance. You just have to ask. There are people that know more than you, and it's not a weakness to not know the answer to those questions, or not even to know the question. I mean, the way that I started to get over that, it was mostly I just didn't want to, as you said, I didn't want to be seen as unknowledgeable, and I didn't want to, be seen as stupid, I guess. But I had this really great mentor who was another brand strategist, and she would ask what I would consider the dumbest questions. And she did it intentionally. And there was a strategy behind it. She would like come into a room with a person who was running a company about scissors, like say they make the world's greatest manufacturer of scissors. And she would start the conversation by saying, okay, tell me what scissors are. And then you get like, some really interesting, plus the person thinks that's funny, but also you get some really interesting ideas and what's their context on that thing? How do they see the thing that they sell? And then they're eventually, almost immediately, they're going to start telling you what's probably got scissors. Nobody uses scissors. Gosh, it's such a hard industry, and then so you have more information. You have something to get going on. And it didn't feel, after watching her do it enough times, it didn't feel stupid. It felt instructive. Although I did have one guy in a brand presentation, and brand presentations, you do a lot of strategy presentations. There is just intentionally some recap, right? You want to show people that you were listening to them for one, and that you understand what they're going through and that you understand their challenges. And I did have one guy stop me about a quarter of the way through the presentation and just say, stop talking. Why are you telling me all this stuff? And so then I had to tell him why I was telling him all this stuff. I was like, well, want to make sure that everybody, there are 17 other people in the room and maybe they need to hear this. And, and this is what we talked about. I want to make sure I'm setting up my argument. I'm going to show you, I promise you, in like 5 slides, you're going to be blown away. It was just like, come on.
But I think the obvious stuff to, like you said, the obvious stuff to some people is not actually obvious to everyone, one. And oftentimes the most obvious stuff is the most fundamental stuff.
Oh, the basics.
And if you aren't on the same page about that, then forget the complicated stuff. Like if you haven't set the groundwork, as it were, I think it's, you're kind of screwed for the rest of your presentation.
Agreed. Yeah, everything you think this is the problem that I keep running into with the book that I'm writing. I'm like, I'm writing it and I keep thinking, doesn't everybody know this? Like, why am I telling them this again? And they don't. I actually didn't answer your question when you asked about the book about, why do I think people need to know more about brand? I think that there are a lot of people that do, but there are certainly a lot of instances still in my career where we'll have a client come to us and say, I need a website. And we'll say, well, yeah, you do, but it's not just a web problem you have a story problem, you have a perception problem, you have a message problem. All of those things are tied to brand strategy and messaging strategy. And it begs repeating to those people that wouldn't have known that, yeah, it does actually valuable to take a step back and know this stuff. And then I want to just make it, simple. and easy to understand and not daunting. Another thing that I have heard lots is, we don't have the money, we don't have the time, it's not worth it. Let's not take a year on this. And it doesn't have to take a year at all. It can take, a relatively minimal amount of time.
This idea of asking the dumb question is, I just think it's so fundamental, especially for people that are at the start of their career, because they're so keen and hungry to show what they know to the client. And oftentimes, actually, it's a little bit like going to a dinner party and someone just taking the mic. It's like asking a question. They'll be like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" And you're like, "I don't know, web designer," or whatever you say. And then they're like, "Oh yeah, so that really reminds me of that time that I was in Mexico and I spoke to this web designer and he was so," and you've just stolen the mic, right? And it's not a conversation. And I think the vice versa with Webflowers that do their initial questions with clients, a lot of the time they actually aren't really listening to the answers. They're thinking about the next question that they're going to ask, or they're actually just trying to use that just to sell. And I think a lot of the time it's actually ask the dumb questions to unravel and let the other person talk. They're not dumb in the sense that they're stupid questions. They may sound stupid because they're so simple, but actually that you need to just let the other person unravel and talk and take a beat, like you say, before you speak again. Just let them give you what you need to be able to do your job. Okay, I feel like I've hammered that point home. I've spoken too much. I've stolen your mic. Let's give you back the mic. This is the hardest question. Are you ready?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Tell me what your next failure is going to be.
Oh God. I can tell you what I hope it's not, but let me see. I am probably, this is one of the things that when you asked me to do this, I thought about as a currently failing at. I am probably going to fail at having a lucrative speaking career. Unless, and I definitely will fail at it if I fail to write the book. So the thing
I think you are well on the way to have a very lucrative career, in fact.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope so. But the thing that I hope I don't fail at is in like 8.5 hours that I don't forget the lyrics to the song I'm supposed to sing.
That's the immediate failure that might happen. But I think you're gonna, like you said during this podcast, you were just like, you know what? Failures are going to happen, but I'm going to ride on through. I'm going to learn from it next time. It's a constant evolution from a caterpillar to a butterfly.
The beat goes on whether I know the words or not. So
hey, the drummer's going to keep playing, the guitarist's going to keep strumming. So either way, people are going to hear the music. Is there anything that you want to say at the end of this episode before we wrap up, Kendra?
Oh, no, except for it was a joy to talk to you again, Jack. This was a lot of fun and really appreciate you asking me to do this. And ladies, come talk to him. That's my best advice.
I need you as my wing woman, Kendra. No, but it was awesome chatting to you. And thank you for sharing as vulnerably as you have on the Webflower podcast.
All right, thank you.